Sat Naams, yogis, yoginis. Let's talk today about the Kundalini Yoga Upanishad and a few other things which are connected, which is mainly the concept of Amrit and one practice which is called Khechari Mudra. What is that? What is that about? How is that connected to Kundalini Yoga? And why should it matter to those of us practitioners of Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan? So let's go into this. This is a classical text. The Upanishads is a collection of texts which expand on the Vedas, and they go into the practice itself more than rituals, but actually go into how to practice. So the Upanishads are very relevant, and there is one called Kundalini Yoga Upanishad. So I think it's worth in the Kundalini Yoga tradition, particularly the one that comes from Yogi Bhajan, is worth going back to the roots and find what is Kundalini Yoga. It's much older than Yogi Bhajan, obviously. So in the roots, how was it taught and how is that connected to us today? How is that relevant and what is not relevant? What is useful for us? What is not for us? And this is my objective for today. And so this Upanishad, Kundalini Yoga Upanishad, or Kundalini Upanishad, is the 86th. And it's after the Yoga Sutras. So it has a style that is similar to Yoga Sutras. You can, when you read it, you feel that there is something connected to the Yoga Sutras in the sense that there is a part of practice. It's telling you some things of practice to do, and it's telling you what can happen in the middle and what is the objective, the final objective. So it's also structured in a similar way in which it has like 3 chapters. And it's not that big. I think, like the Yoga Sutras, they are small texts. And I believe it's worth any practitioner read these texts because they contain a lot of wisdom. But anyway, I've read it, so maybe you don't have to if you just wish to hear, what I have to say in this video. But I encourage everybody to just read it because it's really short, it's really quick. Then I'm sure you can find many explanations on it as well. But let's go into it. Let's see what is relevant, what is not. So the first chapter talks about the practice, and it goes into quite a few details about prana. How does prana affect the mind? It talks about different kind of the postures that we would use to work on the prana, basically going into Padmasana, the lotus pose, and also describing what they call the thunderbolt pose, but it's basically a rock pose. And it talks a little bit more in detail about the breathing in, holding the breath, and breathing out. Something that in this text, if anybody wants to read them, you will find it described as puraka, breathing in. Like pura is like pure, right? So imagine the purity of the air coming in. So that's a way to remember it. And kumbhaka, that's holding it. And then rechaka, think of re like rejecting, right? So getting out. So kumbhaka is the holding, rechaka, getting out, puraka, rechaka, puraka, kumbhaka, rechaka. This is basically it. And there is a lot of description on how to use the breath. And there is an actual kind of practice or sadhana that one can do, utilizing the breath, holding in the breath in, and doing all sorts of things. It talks about the bandhas. It talks about the different. It talks about the chakras, some of the obstacles in the practice. It talks about the different kind of breaths that we can do. Basically, Ujjayi, which is something that in Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yoga Bhajan, we don't practice. And talks about Sitali, which is something that we do incorporate. It also mentions Bastrika, which is also something that we do not practice, but is kind of similar, connected in some ways to breath of fire. But anyway, there is all these practices, holding the breath in, and in our tradition, we have so very many meditations and kriyas also, who is about the breath. Yeah, it's all about inhaling, holding, pumping the navel, exhaling, or inhaling, exhaling, and applying mulband a number of times as the energy rises, and so on. So there is a lot of work through the breath. In this book, Kundalini Upanishads, it talks about how much we need a teacher to guide us through these practices. So even though it describes, it also emphasizes that we do need somebody to guide us through these practices. It's not enough with just reading a book and start practicing on our own, because we don't know what we are really doing. We don't know how long to practice. We don't know if it's appropriate to what we are going through right now. Some practice may be in balance or out of balance with our doshas as well, according to our state from Ayurveda. So everything is so dependent that it's worth noting that this little book mentions the importance of having a teacher, something we already know. And it does mention the goal of yoga as attaining this fourth state that is called Turiya. We may talk about Turiya in some of the video. It's talking about Turiya inside and outside, and through this state of consciousness, reaching knowledge of Brahman. So getting to know Brahma. Brahma is one of the names of God. So that's the first chapter, the practice. The second chapter is all devoted to this Khechari Mudra I mentioned in the beginning. And this book is like saying, like, as if this mudra was like the highest of the highest. It mentions that those who master it are devoid of age and death cannot touch them, which is like, that's a bold claim. Yeah, immortality, right? Which is like the holy grail of many things. Yeah? Many traditions, many philosophers, many alchemists, yeah, looking for the elixir of eternal life, right? So this little book, Kundalini Upanishad, says that the key is in Khechari Mudra. We'll talk more about it. And it also talks about how when you master it, you are free from suffering and diseases. So no disease can touch you, death cannot touch you, and you do not age. So you stay eternal youth. Yeah, eternal youth. Okay. And the word Khechari means to transverse, to cross through to the ethereal regions. And we will talk about Khechari a little bit more. Let's just go into mentioning what the third chapter is about. The third chapter talks about Ajivan Mukta, a being who is Mukta, liberated. Jivan means soul, right? So a liberated soul, that you are liberated while alive, while being in this body. Talks about Samadhi, like a state of Atman, and pure consciousness in which we perceive that everything is one. So all is one. Ekonkar, yeah? Emphasizes this importance of a teacher, and it talks about settling in the heart. Talks about going into the heart, and how when you reach this state and you are able to cross through the intellectual, rational, logical understanding, when you stop trying to understand everything, somehow this intellect gets burned, and what comes is the wisdom of Atman shining in the body like a lamp, Atman being the soul, so the soul shining. It's interesting so this is the third chapter, yeah? It's interesting the connection with the Yoga Sutras. The third chapter would be the Samadhi Pada, the path of Samadhi, and how connected is that? No, it's talking about the objective. In the first chapter, it's interesting, we found also a quote in this little book. It mentions about how much food we need to eat. We should eat sweet and light food. And it mentions about we should leave 1/4 of the stomach empty when we are eating, which is something that Yogi Bhajan also talked about, which is also interesting and relevant to our conversation, meaning that these books are connected, these teachings are connected, they are very old, and they come to us, and so what do we do about it? What else about this book is relevant to us? So let's talk about this Khechari Mudra. In Khechari Mudra, the idea is that the tongue has to go inside and upwards from the back of the throat, going upwards. And in order to do that, if we try to stretch the tongue, the frenulum is going to stop the tongue from going up. So in this practice, even this little book describes how we should do this, and it says a teacher should do it, right? But it talks about cutting like a hair of it, just like a hair, cutting the frenulum a little bit, and then I think it's with milk or ghee, I don't remember how the details, but you would heal it, and then when it's healed, then you cut a little bit more, and then when it's healed, a little bit more, a hair's breadth, yes, just a little bit. And in 6 months, you would be able to get into the position. Now I've seen websites and people who describe exercises that you can do, massaging the tongue and doing other kind of practices that don't require the cutting of the frenulum, but the idea is the same, to bring the tongue inside through the back of the throat up. So let's take a look at a little drawing on what it means, and then if anybody is interested, you can find videos online of people doing it and even X-rays, and you can see how it's performed. But let's do a little drawing that demonstrates this, that shows this. So basically, let us have the face of a yogi. More or less. Inside the mouth, we would have the teeth, and then the upper palate, and then tongue, lips and teeth. And now here we have the little bell in the back of the throat, and this is the nasal passage. And it's more or less like this. It's like a conch. This resonates. There are some channels here. The air passes through them, and the sound vibrates within the nose in the nasal cavity. And there is some kind of little bone here. This is a bone, yeah. And then it goes back, and this will be the throat going down into the body, like that. So this is more or less the head. Here we would have our brains, more or less like this. Yeah, with something like that. And let's draw this tongue. Let's make it a pink tongue. And the idea in this Khechari Mudra, which I'm going to write here, is that the frenulum is cut enough and the tongue is stretched enough that you can go up behind this, what I call the bell that is hanging in our mouth, and bringing the tongue up, bringing it up here, and touch here. Now, in the description of the Kundalini Upanishad, it talks about bringing the tongue all the way to the third eye and all the way into the ears and to the top of the head. But I'm not sure that's really possible. I think that even through the stretching, you can definitely get the tongue in this cavity that I'm mentioning. But there is a nasal, there is a kind of like a structure here, a bone structure that closes the nasal passage from the inside. And if you look from the inside like that, in this direction, yeah. If you look in this direction, you would see the opening is closed like that. And there is 2 holes, yeah? 1 and 2. And the air passes through one and goes to the one nostril, and the other one goes to the other nostril. So even if you could get the tongue long enough, you would not make it pass through these holes, I believe. It talks about the tongue reaching the ears, and actually what happens is that there is a conduct that goes through from the ears and ends up in the throat. So, for example, when we are in an airplane and the ears are, like you can feel this pressure in the inner ear. There's a way that we can do this, like popping the ears to just get the pressure equalized. How do we do this? We close the nose and we try to blow. So why? Because if we blow, the air comes through the nose. That means the air is traveling up the throat and into the nose. But if you close it, then instead of going into the nose, it goes through these two little holes, which are more or less around here, 1 and 2, yeah, in the upper side of the throat. And actually, when you bring the tongue into this passage, this is the pink tongue, yeah. You can, with the tongue, you can actually touch and feel this conduct that goes to each ear. And you can touch with the tongue and feel the ear, pop, 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 like that. So that's interesting. And that could be why this text talks about bringing the tongue up into the ears. I believe it's this. Now, I believe there is another way of using this. One way of using this mudra is to actually doing alternate nostril breathing without the use of the hand. So you would sit in total stillness, which is something that we often recommend, right, in meditation, to stay still. And when we are doing alternate nostril breathing, the hand is moving and is distracting. So with the body completely still, keeping the tongue in Khechari Mudra, you can just close one nostril or close the other and do the alternate nostril breathing. You could even do a practice like Darshan Chakra Kriya without the use of the hands. That's perfectly possible. And that's one way the Khechari Mudra could be used. But in this, in Kundalini Upanishad, it talks about bringing the tongue up to the top of the head. And I believe what it means, you have to interpret all these things. Yeah, and this is my interpretation, and maybe somebody knows something that I don't know, and you can tell us in the comments, write it down, and let's, gather our wisdom. Yeah, this is why these videos are in YouTube, so that everybody can share the wisdom and we can all learn together. But my belief is that this practice is done when it talks about the roof of the head. It's actually talking about this bone. And the reason is because there is right here, I'm going to do it in another color. Right here is where the pituitary sits. That's the pituitary gland, right there. And actually, something that the Kundalini Upanishad talks about, it mentions Saraswati Nadi. Now, Saraswati was a very major river in India, but it's also the name of a nadi that passes through the tongue. There is different versions. I've seen diagrams where they talk about Saraswati in a different place, but definitely associated to the tongue, through the middle of the tongue. And Saraswati is the goddess connected to music and art, and music and chanting would be related to the tongue, so it kind of makes sense. But anyway, the tongue has a lot of energy passing through it. It's really important. And we know how important it is because of its connection to Shabbat Guru, and how the tip of the tongue will be touching different points in the upper palate, and that's going to create different effects in the hypothalamus and the brain and the frontal lobes, and stimulating the pituitary and the pineal and all sorts of things. And is the whole idea behind Shabbat Guru. And that's a whole another topic for another day. Very, very interesting day, that topic. So we know that a lot of energy is passing through the tongue, this Saraswati Nadi, right? So when the tongue is in this position, when it's in this position which is going upwards and going straight into the pituitary, you are directing all the energy up into the pituitary, which is something that we may want to do. And very interesting. And I believe this is the key of the Khechari Mudra when you're practicing it. It describes how you're receiving a nectar. Now, this nectar that you're receiving, that's the Amrit. That we see talk about this quite a few times, and we will talk a little bit more in detail today. But before we talked about this Amrit, let's talk about the channels of energy and this energy passing through the pituitary. And we're going to explore this with another diagram, this time coming from Chinese medicine. So now this will be our head, but let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's see how the drawing looks today. I tend to do very thin yogis, but anyway, it will work out. So in Chinese medicine, the thing is, Chinese meridians and nadis don't necessarily have to coincide, because Chinese medicine is more dedicated towards the health and well-being, while the nadis are more dedicated towards enlightenment and freedom. So their purpose is not necessarily the same, even though some of them will coincide, and they are like very important channels anyway. Actually, in Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yogi Bhajan, we use meridians a lot, and you can find it in the meditations that we have, like described. It's not always explained. Actually, very rarely it is explained. But meditations like this, what are we doing? Why are we moving the hands like that? The dancing hand meditation. What's the purpose of this? Well, we are stretching this side of the forearm, and there is a nadi going through here, and you are stretching it. So there is a meaning of why we do the mudras, the movements, the postures that we do. There is it has a lot to do with meridians, but we don't often study it. So let's just describe something about meridians which is very relevant to what we are talking today. Now, there is two major meridians in Chinese medicine, and they are called, one is related to yang, and the other one is to yin and yang, yeah? The polarity that is always present in Chinese medicine and Taoist teachings. So one is called the governor vessel. It's like the sea of yang meridians. Yeah? This is the yang energy. And I've read text to make sure I make it pass through the right place, and it describes it first goes down from the lower belly to the bottom of the spine, and then raises, up to the top of the head. And actually, this would correspond to Sushumna Nadi, yeah? So there is an alignment with Sushumna. And then from the top of the spine, the top of the head, it goes down through the forehead. I did a very funny forehead today, but it doesn't matter. And it goes up to the upper gum. Yeah, the gums are where the teeth are attached to, so the upper one. So it will come down all the way to the upper gum. And the other channel, the other vessel, it is called conception. Like conceiving, yeah? And it's the yin, feminine energy. And, conception happens in the belly, yeah? In the belly of the mother. That's where the baby is going to be growing. So it describes how it also goes down first and then goes to the front of the body. It's very interesting when the women are very pregnant, very full. You can see a dark line in this area of the front of the body, and it goes all the way up, but it does not connect with the governor vessel, but rather it finishes in the lower lip. let me just put here in red, upper gum. Upper gum. So these two channels are not connected. And it's sometimes described how the very act of speaking may help to connect, but especially the tongue can do that, because there's so much energy flowing through the tongue that when you bring the tongue up, you can create like the circuit. It's like closing the circuit, like pressing the switch and the circuit closes, and then energy begins to flow. And in Taoist practices, in Taoist teachings, you will find how they encourage this flow of energy through the body and creating what is called a microcosmic orbit. You can read about this in the internet. There's plenty of websites that are going to tell you about this orbit. I talked to a Kung Fu teacher and practitioner and who practices Qigong and some of these Taoist practices, and he was also asking his Chinese teacher about this, and he described how this microcosmic orbit has two ways of moving. You can inhale through the back, exhale through the front. You can inhale through the front, exhale through the back. And the two of them would be a little bit different. One would be more for those who wish to devote their life to a spiritual path in a more ascetic way, and those who want to be more householders. Now, these are terms, I use the ascetic and householder term, the Chinese teachings say it in a different way, but it was basically describing the same. Those who want to have a family, they will do the microcosmic orbit in one direction, and those who just wish to devote all their energy and their sexual energy to transmute it for spiritual purposes would do the orbit in a different direction. And it's very interesting that in these Chinese Kung Fu practices, they have these two concepts as well, the concept of the householder and the ascetic. And we know that in Kundalini Yoga, as we are practicing the householder path. So that's what it would be recommended. But this teacher would also mention how you would practice this microcosmic orbit many times, many cycles, and eventually after years of practice, you would notice that this circle of movement of energy would actually become like a vertical breath, purely vertical through the middle, through the center line of the spine. So that would be just the Sushumna, right? But before this would be open, they in their practice, they actually go through the back channel and the frontal channel. So they move the energy through both. Now we know that in our body, if we have to place the chakras in somewhere, the chakras are energetic things, so they are not physical. But if you have to place them somewhere, then they would be in the spine, but they have like a projection forward and backwards. Yeah, this would be like a spiral projection. Yeah. So there is a front area and a back area. And this friend of mine mentioned how sometimes you may do these practices going through the chakras in a meditation that you are inhaling through one chakra, exhaling through the next, inhaling through the other, exhaling through the other, and through the back and through the front. So maybe you are inhaling through the second chakra in the back, exhaling through the Manipura in the back, inhaling through the Manipura in the back, exhaling through Anahata in the back, inhaling through Anahata in the back, exhaling through Vishuddha in the back, like inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, like that, which I find it very interesting. And as usual, my purpose is not to mix traditions, and I don't suggest everybody to practice this, and certainly not for Kundalini yogis. But why not experiment it and explore what does it feel like, and know that these channels are here, and how does it feel that the energy moves through these channels? Because it actually happens anyway. As we are meditating, the energy is moving through them, and we can have an experience of that, and just to know what is happening. Now, this microcosmic orbit, which is very relevant in Taoist teachings, and is relevant for Chinese medicine. And I found it also in some drawings. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna show. I did a printout. This is a book. This is a book called The Subtle Energy Body. It's the Complete Guide by Maureen Lockhart. I'll put the name in the description. And this is the diagram that they use. And it talks about how the Taoist model of the subtle body, this is in the left, has similarities to the Tantric model in the right. And it talks about Kundalini Tantra. And look at the diagrams with the arrows, yeah? With doing the macrocosmic orbit. I hope you can see it in the Kundalini Tantra and in the Qigong. It just uses different names, yeah, Chinese names for these things. It talks about the three tantiums as well, with something very interesting. And I have a video already talking about the three caves and the three grantees and the three bandhas, which help to unlock these three caves. And you can check the video that I talk about these things. And there is Chinese terminology for describing these things, which I very much believe they are connected. Now, this book talks about how these Kriya Yoga practices also move the prana through these channels and is so very connected. Yeah. So there's something to this. Let me show another diagram. This time is from a little book, not a little, it's actually quite thick, called Dharana Darshan. Dharana. Interesting, the title is called Dharana. Dharana is one of the 8 steps in the Yoga Sutras. Yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, yeah? Dhyana, samadhi. Dharana would be associated to a concentration stage. And in this book, it describes all sorts of practices to concentrate us and concentrate the energy, and it moves the energy through these channels. This book is from Yoga Bihar, the Bihar School of Yoga, from the Shivananda tradition. And let's bring it in. And again, I'm not mixing traditions. We have there's plenty of research showing that Yogi Bhajan studied with in the Shivananda school for a time. We don't know how long. He may have even taught there. We don't know exactly. But he's certainly been in contact with his teachings, and they're certainly very present all throughout his teachings. I found several quotes, and we may go into detail in some of the videos where Yogi Bhajan is talking about a concept, and I hear a lecture by Shivananda. It's just exactly the same concept with the same words, but just describing it maybe a little bit different, but basically the same. And so in this book, which is relevant from the Bihar School of Yoga, we will find this diagram. Now, instead of, like we have the mantra on Sohang, this uses the Soham mantra. So it would do So, inhaling through the front. Notice it goes up to the Ajna, to the pituitary point, where the center of the Ajna chakra is, coming down, Ham. So, Ham, yeah? And there's the variation in Samso, which is starting from the top and then coming down to the back and then ending up again in the top. But this is the microcosmic orbit. Yeah. So it is certainly relevant to the practice of yoga. Okay. Now, when they talk about this microcosmic orbit, and particularly when it's talked about the putting the tongue in the nasal cavity when it's stretching it through Khechari Mudra, it is described how this stimulates the flow of Amrit. Now, it's very interesting, coming back to medicine, Chinese medicine, I found some extraordinary acupuncture points like this. It's probably too little to read this, but it's not so important. Let's just pay attention that it talks about these 3 points in the tongue. And the tongue, as we mentioned, that is very important. We use it for chanting, and chanting the name is the most relevant, right? Is the highest spiritual practice, chanting the name. When we chant, we use the tongue. And the tongue, I believe, is like a reflection, like a mirror of the Sushumna. Sushumna and Ida and Pingala, these two sides that we can see here, two sides, it's like Ida and Pingala around the central channel of Sushumna. We know that the whole body it has a fractal structure, yeah? You can see in the ear is the whole body. There is points in the ear which reflect that the whole body is right here. The hand as well, yeah? You can see like the head and the arms and the legs, and you can find points in the hand which are acupuncture points or acupressure points, which are a reflection of any part of the body. So in the tongue, we also have like a reflection of these three channels. And I just find it very interesting that these two channels are called the golden fluid, the jade fluid. Golden would be more like a warm color, probably more like a yang form of energy, and jade more greenish, which is a cool color, probably describing a yin channel. So that would be the yin, this would be the yang, like Ida and Pingala. And then we would have the central channel, Sushumna, which is called the sea source. Relevant, maybe somebody watching this video knows about these acupuncture points, and they can tell us a bit more about why these names, golden fluid, jade fluid, and sea source. Certainly very appealing names, very exciting to know what this means, but it really falls out of my understanding. I don't know anything about acupuncture. I just take diagrams from the internet and I share them here. So anybody who knows about this, please share. Now, this sea source is interesting when we are stretching the tongue in the Khechari Mudra. Not only creates a lot of saliva here, but stimulates the pituitary. And pituitary and pineal are also secreting, helping to secrete in the body like hormones, but also secreting saliva. Sometimes when we are meditating with the tongue up, we feel all this saliva that accumulates. And there is some very healing properties to saliva, and it can hold a lot of prana. We use saliva in many mudras and many breaths, like Sitali or Sitkari. We are bringing prana through the teeth, and it gets into the saliva. And then it's good to swallow the saliva. You know, the animals use it to lick their wounds, so it has good properties, and you can bring the saliva inwards and heal yourself from the inside. Let's go back. Now, there is another kind of liquid. There is another kind of, it's described as liquid, which is something higher. This is the Amrit. This is what is called as Amrit. And Amrit is generally described as a nectar, which flows down, and is the nectar of immortality. Yeah. There is a story in a legend, really, in the Hindu stories, Hindu legends. It's called Samudra Mantana, and they are trying to create this nectar of immortality. But as they are trying to do it, there is a poison being released that is going to destroy all the creation. And as a sacrifice, Shiva consumes this poison and to prevent the destruction of the world. So it says that Shiva consumes this poison, and by doing so, his throat becomes blue. His throat becomes blue because of the poison. And that's called Nil Kant, because Nil is blue and Kant means throat. So very interesting. I've seen a different description of the same, talking about how in the Bindu, in our heads, up here, let's make it bluish. There is a point where this nectar can flow, yeah, and it flows down, and you can receive it through the tongue and receive it inwards. And in this description that I heard, I don't remember very much where, but maybe somebody knows about this. This Amrit is a mixture. There is the Amrit and there is the poison, and both come together like the polarity, and we swallow it. And one of it gives us life and energy, and this is why we are alive, and the other one gives us death. And as they come into our belly, one makes us grow old and eventually die, and the other one is giving us this vitality. And it is said that through Khechari Mudra, when you're doing Khechari Mudra, you can actually filter the poison and just receive the nectar, just receive the Amrit. So as you keep the tongue up, you start feeling a change in the taste, and you feel this kind of liquid, something very sweet coming down and nourishing you. And this is what in the Kundalini Upanishad is described, that heals all ailments and prevents death. All right, all this about Khechari Mudra. Now, how is this relevant for somebody who practices Kundalini Yoga taught by Yogi Bhajan? We don't cut the frenulum, first of all, and we do not encourage anyone to do that, not at all, yeah? And this is one of those ascetic practices that yogis experimented with that we do not encourage to do. However, some part of the practice is very interesting, and that is what is happening with the energy in ourselves. Now, the tongue, we don't have to bring it all the way down up here through this passage. Just bringing the tongue up and placing it on the roof of the palate, on this point here, in the upper point, this Saraswati Nadi, yeah? Is going to bring energy flow straight into the pituitary. It's not so close as the tongue going upwards through this passage, but the direction is basically the same. And the flow of the channel, this connection happens anyway, yeah? You are connecting the two rivers anyway. You are creating this microcosmic orbit. And so you are opening the passage for Bindu to flow. Sorry, for Amrit to flow from Bindu. And there is also in Taoist practices, I've seen it done as well, with the tongue in the upper palate in different points. And different points of the upper palate, they describe it like the fire position or the water position or the air. In Kundalini Yoga, we have many meditations where Yogi Bhajan described us to say, place the tongue in the upper palate. And the one we are going to focus on is particularly not behind the teeth, but really up. And it's where the hard palate becomes soft. And there is like a little navel in the upper palate, from soft and to like more textured surface of the upper palate. If you are trying with your tongue now to check the point, it's like there is more texture and then it becomes soft. Yeah, there is hard and it becomes not so hard. So it's in that point, which is quite far back. Yeah? It is not pointing straight up. It's actually pointing a little bit back. And that's going to go and stimulate the pituitary gland. And that's going to stimulate the flow of Amrit. And that's going to make this Amrit descend. And if you filter the poison, you swallow this Amrit, yeah, like Shiva. And Shiva and Krishna is also described as blue, yeah. They are depicted as blue in these stories. Then you can receive this nectar. Now, we don't really do the microcosmic orbit in Kundalini Yoga, but I have seen the usage of the frontal passage in at least one meditation. I think I remember this ascending of the energy through the back. This is super common in Kundalini Yoga meditations. Even just from the chanting of the long Ekonkar, we would be chanting and we would be ascending the energy all throughout the back up to get to the top, which is when we say that Kundalini Shakti merges with the energy of Shiva, and the mixture of the two, then it descends into our heart. Well, I believe this mixture, that's the Amrit. Yeah, when we talk about Shiva and Shakti merging, meeting together, and then the nectar coming down, that would be the Amrit. So, when we are not speaking and when we are not laying down, sleeping, we could do this with the tongue. Why leave the tongue idle? Idle? I'm not sure. Idle? I'm not sure now. Why leave the tongue without moving it and keeping it in rest when you can keep the tongue up? So we would suggest that, I would suggest to keep the tongue always parked there in the upper palate, in that point up there. And you know, this is one of those things that we always bring from the teachings, what to do in the day-to-day life is conscious breathing, have the mantra within us, inhale Sat, exhale Naam, or whatever your personal mantra is, inhale Wah, exhale Guru, or like in this drawing we were seeing before, Sohang, Om Sohang, yeah? So have the mantra vibrating, be conscious of your breath, breath slow, and keeping the tongue in the upper palate is going to help for that. So what not to do when you're not talking, keep the tongue there. So when you have to talk, somebody is telling you something, before unparking your tongue, just check, what am I going to say? Is it relevant what I'm saying? Is it necessary to say it? And then say it or not. Okay. So let's explore a little meditation from Kundalini Yoga, which actually encourages us to do exactly this, keeping the tongue in the upper palate. And this is the meditation for the blue pearl. And in the manual for mind and meditation, the level 2 is described as Nilkant. Actually, the very same term that I mentioned as Shiva consuming the poison and his blue throat, Nilkant, is the term that is used in the manual. And it's interesting. It talks about the blue pearl as this concept, Nilkant, which is the same term as the blue throat from Shiva. Now, there is, I've seen also a book by Swami Muktananda talking, I think it's called Play of Consciousness, and it talks about Nil Bindu. It's a blue point, and it also describes the point in the very same point where we practice in the tip of the nose. He meditates through it, and he goes into certain states of consciousness. Now, the very same thing Yogi Bhajan taught us to do. This is why I'm saying, that's why I'm going back to these teachings and reading these texts so that we can see the connection of where do they come from. So the origin of this blue pearl meditation may have an origin in these practices which are connected to the Kundalini Upanishad and to this color of blue in Shiva and the release of Amrit and the keeping the tongue up. So I will share a link in the description of this video with the meditation itself from the website 3HO. And in this meditation, it describes bringing the tongue back and up as far as you can. So that would coincide with the attempt to go into Khechari Mudra. We're going to keep the tongue, though, pressing in the upper point, pressing up as far as you can, but pressing up so that it's pointing towards the pituitary. So that's the mudra that we're going to do with the tongue. Yeah, it's a mudra. Mudra is not only with the hands. Mudras can also be done, in this case, with the tongue. So we're going to keep the tongue there. And in this meditation, it's called the Blue Pearl Meditation. Why? Because we are focusing on the tip of the nose, and we're going to see some blue color, blue light, which corresponds to this blue pearl. And as I mentioned, you can find descriptions of this blue pearl in other more classical traditions of yoga, like the one from Swami Muktananda. So let's do this only. We do this only 3 minutes, but in your practice you would do it for longer. Sit in easy pose, and the hands are in Yam Mudra on your knees, and we will do this for 3 minutes. Close your eyes. And the eyes are focused on the tip of the nose. The eyes are, not closed. They are 1/10 open, one little bit open. Because you're actually hoping to get to see this blue pearl. Yeah? And so the eyes are focused on the tip of the nose. Now bring the tongue up and back. And find this point really far up. And get a little bit of pressure there. Really, you should feel a stretch in the nerves of the tongue. That's going to stimulate the scissors and the release of energy through the Sushumna, the Kundalini. And as it reaches to the top of the head, which the direction of your tongue is going to stimulate, the Amrit is going to flow down. And as the Amrit is going to flow down, this blue color is going to get intense and you may see it. But your forehead may become heavy. So go into the position now with the tongue, eyes looking at the tip of the nose. The forehead may get heavy. It's all right. It will get released as you practice. And just focus and pay attention to see if you notice this blue light. Breathe slowly and consciously. You may feel energy moving through the back or maybe even through the front, but don't worry about that. All your attention is on the tip of the nose. Inhale deep. And exhale. Okay, it's very short time, only 3 minutes, but hopefully you had a little bit of an experience. So experiment, explore, see how it feels to keep the tongue in the upper palate. I've seen that recommendation in many places. I've seen it, for example, for healers, pranic healing, practitioners of pranic healing and healers. While they are they are working on the energy, they are recommended to keep the tongue up. So this is certainly is so present in so many meditations from Kundalini Yoga that is certainly worth exploring. I hope you had an experience, and I would like to know: did you see the blue pearl? It was very short, 3 minutes, so maybe have a few tries at home, taking some more time, longer times, and explore, concentrating the eyes in this point. The heaviness will release, and then you will see the blueness, and it can be like a blue pearl. There's the song Blue Lagoon as well, maybe connected to this. And write your comments in the video. If you are a practitioner from Khechari Mudra, if you come from another tradition and you came upon this video, can you tell us something about how you practice it? What does it do to you? How does it feel? Do you feel the Amrit flowing? How is it for you? It could be interesting to hear other voices. Yoga is about union, so let's join us with other traditions to understand how they practice, how we practice, and benefit, so we can all benefit together. As usual, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, do so we can grow. This channel benefits a lot from every like and every comment and every subscription that you do. And until next time, thank you. Sat Nam.